Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Goats and Cookies. This go around, you've got Lou as your host. With me, as always, uh, are my co-hosts, everyone's favorite Kev, and of course, Zach. And this episode is titled Political Use of the Fallen. We've discussed propaganda a lot on this show. And as a Marine journalist, and as well, Jesse is a Marine journalist, and then Kevin is even as a photographer. We've helped set the tone of war, giving the Marine Corps narrative to the American and global public, as was directed by leadership. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that and the use of the fallen to drive political narrative. But before we get going, Zach, you have our book of the week.
I do. So, our book of the week this week is a pretty rare one. I found a copy of it a while ago and then ended up getting a second copy with one of the uniforms behind me. But it's called My Private Life. It is written by Mr. Bill Alexander, who was a Marine Corps rifleman and ended up going to Iwo Jima for his only combat experience of the war with Company E, 2nd Battalion, 26 Marines. And what's really unique is the whole memoir begins with his introduction into boot camp, into some of the leadership and officers that he encountered, and into his 6 days on Iwo, if I remember that correctly, before he's wounded and hit by a mortar rail. But what's really unique about his memoir, in my opinion, compared to a lot of World War II ones, is that he really does talk about the impact that good leadership had on him and gives specific names of the officers and the NCOs that he served with. And a lot of the memoirs kind of leave out those details. I don't know if that's for privacy reasons or if for the guys that wrote those books, they just couldn't remember their names. But his platoon leader on Iwo was William Barber, who actually got a Medal of Honor years later as a company commander in Korea during the Chosin Reservoir defensive actions there. And on Iwo Jima, he earned a Silver Star, and Bill Alexander was with him in the action that earned the Silver Star when they were clearing out bunkers. And so it's a pretty unique tie there. I'm going to turn this off for a second, but this uniform here is Bill's. I got it a little while back from another collector, and so I'm able to treasure his uniform and share his story while I can. I'm gonna try to be doing some maybe shorts or short videos reading chapters of it to tie with the uniform. That way, people that haven't seen the memoir can maybe hear his story. So there's our book of the week, My Private Life by Mr. Bill Alexander.
Outstanding. Thank you, Zach. Everyone go check that out. And we do have a new segment. I know that um, we'll probably in the future do these later on in the episode, but I think considering today's content, if it's all right with you guys, we can go ahead and do the photo of the week. Um, I felt that considering the today's topic that this photo was fitting to maybe set. I know I said set the tone initially, so why not set the tone for this episode? And I will pull up that photo. I'll give you a little background on it. After the Second Marine Division had finished their 14 months in Iraq, they held a massive memorial ceremony for all of the Marines, sailors, and soldiers even that were killed in action under the Second Marine Division banner. And they held this at on the riverfront at Camp Lejeune. And this particular photo was taken by me. And while it doesn't show necessarily the entire scope backed away, you can see on that very front statue there are all of the dog tags of all of the service members that are represented by each of these statues. And the statues are expansive, but I wanted to kind of show this more close-up version of the photo to kind of give you the literal weight of what we um, experience as far as losses go during that portion of Iraq, which was in between 2005 and 2006. So, uh, any thoughts on these, Kevin and Zach?
Yeah, it's hard to look at, man. I remember a lot of the people that we lost. I knew them probably most of them briefly, bouncing from unit to unit the way we did. It's not like we ever had the chance to get to know them personally. Um, I would attach to a unit and then I would reattach to a unit a couple months later or a month later, and I'd be like, "Oh, where's so and so?" I mean, it was just a somber mood when their name was brought up. And yeah, I mean, I see that and it just hurts. These guys could be in, they should have kids. They should have gone on and had careers. They should have it's hard. It's really hard.
And
Yeah,
chiming in from my perspective, I remember when Fallujah was happening. I was 10. The second battle, at least, I should say, because I know that's the one that got major media news coverage at the time. And I remember seeing reports of the wounded and the killed that were taking place and how it just kept growing. But now that I've gotten older, a photograph of like this hits hard because while in comparative to other conflicts, yes, less casualties were taken, but as Kevin pointed out, each one of those lives should have had a career. They should have had families. They should have gone on to see a life perhaps beyond their time in the Marine Corps or made a career out of their time in the Marine Corps if they chose so. And their lives were cut short. And in my take on this, and with the GWAT veterans I've talked to and the Vietnam vets, um, I don't believe any of those men or women in that photograph attached to the second Mardev died for me, but they did it for one another. You guys know that. You were there. It was for the people to the left and for the right of you, and some of those people gave their lives for the Marines around them so that they might live, willingly knowing those decisions there. And I think that one, the American people need to think on this when we look at conflicts of you don't have to support the war, but you should understand that the people who are there are making the decisions that they made for those around them, in their best judgment with the chaos at the time. But continuing this into our segment, how many times has a photograph like this been used for political purposes to push a narrative, to push a story, to turn one side against the other?
Yeah.
absolutely. And we're going to dive into all of that um, starting now. So, as I was saying, as Marine journalists, we were there to set the tone and give the Marine Corps, tell the Marine Corps story or the Marine Corps narrative um, to the American and global public. Um, but in my experience, one thing, at least personally, that was always held sort of sacred were the stories of the fallen troops killed in action. Of course, we wrote the stories about these individuals, tying in that they died for freedom and the cause, which of course for Iraq was, Operation Iraqi Freedom, or whatever the cause may have been. That we were writing the story, kind of tying that in, of course. But our stories, for the most part, were sort of apolitical, I would say. I suppose they had to be. We couldn't outright say, these men and women died because of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. Obviously, that's would be terrible for us as the writers of it, and it probably wouldn't have gotten beyond our staff NCO's desk. Uh, but more recently, I've noticed dead troops being propped up as political weapons. And I'd like for us to dive into that. As Zach alluded to, sort of where does the line stop? Just as, a sign of humanity or human dignity or decency, or does limiting the use of troops dying to place blame on those in power limit our freedom of speech? Where's the fine line? What do you all think, just on this starting topic, uh, between freedom of speech and respecting the dead.
I've seen that photo. I was thinking when I was looking at it, the photo you shared a moment ago, I was looking at it and thinking about how nationalists would just wet their fucking pants to have that photo so they could go on about how great America is without question, and how right our wars are without question, and how killing in the name of freedom is right without question. And it disgusts me, but at the same time, that's a constitutional right. That's what I fought for. That's what I enlisted for, was the Constitution. It wasn't a president. As I always say, it wasn't a president, it wasn't a political party, it wasn't anything. It definitely wasn't a religion. It was the Constitution. And the First Amendment guarantees our right to use that image to our own political advancement. It's sad, but it is what it is. It's disgusting the way a lot of people use this imagery. I remember when I was in Iraq, I would Google myself regularly to see where my images were ending up. And I ended up in some good places. A lot of places that I would support would use my imagery to not say that we are evil, but to say, hey, this is an unjustifiable war. We shouldn't be there. We shouldn't be doing what we're doing. But I would also find my stuff in a lot of nationalist avenues. I also found myself in a lot of jihadist avenues. A lot of my stuff ended up used as propaganda against us. I think context is everything, and without that context behind the image, a lot of stuff can be taken the wrong way. All that to say, I support the Constitution unconditionally, irrevocably, and I think that anyone using these images will have to live with their use of the image. But I still support their right to do it.
Well, and to kind of go off Kevin's point there, bringing in the Constitution, and does this limit our First Amendment freedom? If we take this right away, and a great example that I'm going to throw up and share real quick is from Vietnam. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this or seen this, and that's why I didn't go to life.com because I don't know if that would get this video taken down. But in June of 1969, Life magazine published a full dedication to it titled 1 Week's Dead. And it featured some 250 plus dead Americans that had been killed in this 1 week in Vietnam. It had their photograph, a little bit of their information on where they were from, how old they were, and when they died. And this especially if you know anything about the Vietnam War, this had huge ramifications. For people that were against the war, this was further pushed by them to show the face associated with the American dead. Because, you guys are Marines. It's one thing to see a headline that says, 3 Marines killed in action and not have any names or faces titled to it. It's another thing, though, that when you are associating a name and a face to this individual instead of just a statistic. Um, but at the same time, as Kevin points out, the weaponization of our dead goes both ways. For any kind of conflict that we will ever fight, going forward and going back in time as long as politics has existed with media. Um, you will have people that will associate, well, this is our reason to continue fighting. Look at what they've done to our American boys. You will have people that will use this as, well, this is our reason to stop fighting. Look at the countless deaths, these 250 or so that have been killed in this 1 week. For what? What purpose has that led to? And I think realistically that no matter what, as long as there is a United States of America or a concept of it, that killed in action troops will always be used by both sides to further whatever agenda, propaganda, or even in reality just to tell their story. But as Kevin said, context is key. The photographs, as you guys know, of dead Americans were shown on all sorts of Al Qaeda news networks that showed how these people died. I mean, Kevin and Lou, in my interviews and conversations with you guys in person and, of course, on Zoom, you guys were telling me how families were finding out that their child had been killed before the Marine Corps had notified them or the Army did because of the propaganda videos that the Taliban were putting up, showing it firsthand. I mean, it's always going to be present. And as Kevin stated, I support the Constitution wholeheartedly, and this is unfortunately always going to be a part of it, where our dead will be used in some capacity for either side that's in power or either side that's wanting to get power.
I hear you both, and that leads kind of directly into this next portion, this next sort of talking point of an actual example of this on both sides. So we'll start with one example, and then I'll give you the other one, and we can talk from there. Um, let's start with this example. During Joe Biden's early term, I do believe it was in 2021, where he withdrew U.S. troops from Afghanistan. And during that withdrawal, 13 troops were killed in action. It seemed as though the right immediately seized the opportunity to use their deaths as an example of Biden's incompetence as a leader and decision making as the commander in chief. What are your guys' thoughts on that? Am I off the mark in how I've described that, or am I right on? And before you answer that, I just want to compare that where recently we've had 18 troops that have been killed in action in Iran, and similarly, the left has used this against Trump. Is there a difference between these two examples, and am I off in my sort of assessment of the situation?
Um, first I'll address the 13 Marines, and I guess first I'll answer your last question. No, there's really not a difference. It also depends on what you consider the left. Left of center is something entirely different. But I'll say that the 13 Marines, it was disgusting. Um, those Marines, they deserved to be remembered for who they were and not reduced to talking points on TV. You know, the same politicians who spent 20 years voting to keep us in Afghanistan, they suddenly acted like they were heartbroken because 13 Marines died on the way out. Where was that outrage when hundreds of Americans and thousands of Afghans were dying every year before that? Um, if they supported the war for 20 fucking years, they don't get to suddenly pretend that those 13 Marines deaths were the only ones that mattered. It's just performative political theater. Um, I would hate for my death to become somebody else's campaign commercial. You know what I'm saying? I would rather people ask why I was there in the first place. As far as the deaths in Iran go, yeah, it's the same. I think if it's fair that you ask that. If we're going to criticize Republicans for using dead troops to attack Biden, then we have to criticize Democrats for doing the exact same thing to Trump as much as I fucking hate him. Consistency, it really matters. And integrity is consistency. The problem isn't who's using the bodies, the problem is that both parties seem perfectly willing to drape themselves in that American flag when it's politically convenient. Every single administration has said support the troops, and very few ask whether the mission deserved the troops. As veterans, I think we're obligated to ask that question.
Yeah,
I think, go
oh, go
ahead,
ahead.
Lou. Sorry.
I was just going to say, just kind of going off of what you said there. I think, the idea of supporting the troops, I think, gets lost in translation for some people where they believe that supporting the troops means you've got to support the cause and the war that they're going
Blindly.
into
Yeah.
blindly, or if you don't, you're not supporting the troops. But wouldn't supporting the troops be to make sure that they're not called upon for bullshit
Yep.
to be sent in there? And with that, Zach, yeah, I'd love to get your opinions on this topic here.
Great point to bring out there. And this is what when I was teaching, I was trying to always teach my students is that you can be patriotic support the troops that are there and not support the government behind it or the political cause behind it, but understanding the Americans that we have there. And I think that's something that as a nation, people really need to reflect and understand what supporting the troops means. Just because you don't support the political cause for our troops being deployed overseas in a country doesn't mean you can't support our servicemen and women over there and do what you can to vote for politicians to bring them home or to end this conflict if you don't agree with it. Because, our troops, as Kevin and Lou, you have too pointed out, and any other veteran we've ever had on here, people enlist into the United States military for a vast of different reasons. Um, they don't choose where they get to go necessarily. It's not like you or Lou were like, aha, I would like to send the entire Marine Corps to Iraq right now. You guys don't choose that. You're a part of a large system that's controlled by politicians above you that determine where you get to go, and depending on this combat that's taking place, where our troops realistically get deployed to combat zones. But um, to answer the excellent question that you brought up, there is no difference between the Biden comparison or the Trump comparison. It's the same exact thing. And as long as we have political parties in power, this will continue to happen for any U.S. troops that are deployed in large scale conflicts to small scale conflicts. It's this tug of war of he's a bad guy because we've lost these amount of people in this country, or she's a bad guy because she's lost this many people in country by her decision. And Kevin, I think you brought up a great point. From your perspective, that you don't want to be used as political propaganda to further a narrative for either side. And I would like to think that most anybody that has served or going to serve wouldn't want to be used as that either. If I died, I wouldn't want to be used as a marty for some side. Remember me, for perhaps if I died for my friends, that I died for them. If I died for a good cause, remember that. But if it's for a conflict that has a lot of questions about it, don't use me for some political nonsense. Just don't. That's what I would like. However, once you're dead and gone, who has say over this? Definitely not me. And as you guys know, the way that politics work, and it's really sad, they feed off of this. Both sides lust over the dead that happened. I mean, you can trace this back to any conflict, and we've ever had media associated with it. I mean, look at the American Civil War and the draft riots that are going to take place, and a lot of those riots that take place in 1863 are associated with just the heavy casualties in 1863. People don't want to be drafted and go become another statistic and another figure there. And this is something that will always continue for as long as media is allowed to report with the dead and who has been killed. And the further that we advance with technology, the more relevant it's going to become, where you are going to literally within hours of somebody being killed, their names, their faces are going to be released just due to social media and its presence. I mean, we have certainly seen that. Um, and to me, it's disgusting when the politics gets utilized for one side or the other. And I understand propaganda is key to either side's story, but to have your trope be dead servicemen or women as your way of um, swinging support regardless, it's just to me that is disgusting. You know, if this was World War II or a conflict that was truly just, a justified conflict where we were being threatened by truthfully an enemy of the nation that had been attacking American citizens, and we have people innocently dying, then perhaps it's a little different. World War II comes to mind for most people, and even then, you can pick apart the political aspects of World War II and how we justify the use of our dead in that regard. I don't know. It's really tough for me to kind of see the propaganda usage of that when you've got families mourning. Not even 24 hours after the families are being notified that their loved one isn't coming home, it's being utilized as a political message. You have presidents, state governors, local congressmen and women making sure to get a handshake and a photograph as a thumbs up to rally support behind that when they probably don't even remember the serviceman's name and they never go visit that grave because they actually don't give a damn.
God damn. Clip that right there. That was awesome.
I wouldn't go that far.
No,
It's a
that's yeah.
it's a sad fact, and you guys know that all too well. You fucking seen it. You saw your unfortunate fair share of dead. Um, and to continue this rant, and I love each and every single one of you veterans. Because one, can't serve, but I generally value you guys. You signed up to do something that most people will never know why they did it. Both of you and I have talked, and this is what I love about you guys. You didn't do it for me. Once you got there into those combat situations, you did it for those around you. But we love to talk about the American dead, but we forget about the innocent people caught in the middle. I mean, look at any look at Vietnam. Look at Iraq and Afghanistan, how many innocent civilians were killed by both sides? Wrong place, wrong time. And we don't want to talk about that portion of the war where the innocence was lost and killed from those people that had no right to die, that were just, unfortunately, their homeland was caught right in the middle of this conflict now. What about them? What about the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and Afghanis that died just due to the unfortunate circumstances? How come nobody talks about them? They're innocent folks too. Shouldn't they have a right to life, to live their way of life that they were raised on, not just our own troops that were killed? And it's very tragic, but what about that civilian population too? They didn't ask for that war to come to their front door either.
Yeah. I didn't want to really go into great detail on it, but a lot of my photos that were used out of context, that were used against us were that type. It was civilian casualties. And while we're definitely guilty of it, I'm not going to deny that the U.S. has killed countless civilians. The ones that I photographed that were used out of context weren't our doing. It wasn't our doing. It was them trying to get us and getting them instead. And I tell a lot of people this, kind of not to go off rails too much, but in Iraq, I didn't fight Iraqis. I just didn't. I fought Jordanians and Syrians and Pakistanis and Saudis, the Mujahideen that came to Iraq to fight us. The Iraqi people, they were innocent in all of this. They were just, especially in Al Anbar, they were just Bedouins and farmers who wanted to live a peaceful life. And then we were there. A lot of the guys I've talked to that were in Afghanistan, they would talk to the civilians and they thought they were Russian, because it's just been war after war after war since Alexander the Great. Yeah, I mean, they don't know who is fighting there at this point because it's just been nothing but fighting. Um, it's a really sad reality, and yeah. Anyway, sorry. Thanks for bringing that up, man.
No, I mean, thank you guys for being honest about it. I mean, as a great point to that of just how this propaganda is taken, because this is a great question that you brought up, Lou. It's the first great point, if you can't
Yeah,
tell. Um, But those context photographs are taken out. I mean, you take civilian dead, and they're going to be photographed. In any war that cameras have existed, the dead will always be photographed. It's that human curiosity, the fascination of death. They're going to be posted online. You guys saw it in your time with just the shared drives. And then, hell, I saw it with what, 4chan and Reddit and what other websites you have emerging in this time. I think what gore.com or something like that used to be a website that's going to showcase a lot of that.
that was a
But
big part of my job. Yeah,
yep. And the dead are always going to be used, civilian and military, for the positive side of propaganda and politics and for the negative side. It's always going to be used out of context. I mean, look at Vietnam. My Lai is a great example of that and a tragic incident. And as Kevin and Lou and you and I know, that while yes, in wars, U.S. troops have killed and committed war crimes. Absolutely they have in any war that's ever existed. Is it the minority? By far it is. But does it happen? Sure. But Vietnam's a great example where you have a minority incident that doesn't make up the overall story of the war that's going to become the narrative of the war. And
yeah.
every Vietnam veteran for the next 15 to 20 years, until about the era of the Vietnam Wall is brought up, is going to be accused of being baby killers, of being innocent killers of civilians and men and women. And I've had a few Vietnam veterans tell me that yes, they did things like that and they regretted it absolutely. But I've also had others tell me that they never saw civilians because they were so far up north, but that was a trope associated with them.
My dog agrees with you. I don't know if you heard that.
So Trevor, I said hello.
He says hi to everybody. Um, yeah, well, uh, I'm glad we're having this conversation. To be
Yeah.
honest with you, when we had talked about what the topics for today's episode was going to be, I just kind of threw this out there, but I'm glad we're talking about it. And with that, let's get, kind of talking about the propaganda aspect of it as we've been discussing. is it just as bad when troops' deaths are lifted up on a pedestal? Um, yeah, is it bad? Is it? I'm trying to word this correctly, but lifting them up on a pedestal not as a way of honoring them, but as a way of pushing a pro-war agenda. Is it just as bad as like the reverse of that?
I would say that using honoring the fallen and then using them to sell another war, that's completely different. Honor is what tells their story. Um, Propaganda, it tells your story using the body. They're definitely not the same thing. When I see politicians standing in front of rows of crosses talking about sacrifice, standing in front of photos like the one you shared a little bit ago, I know there was a politician of some sort there. My first question is, what have you done to make sure there aren't more crosses next year? Um, if if honoring the dead doesn't make you work harder to prevent unnecessary wars, then you're just decorating tragedy. At the risk of kind of implicating myself on the topic here, as a socialist, I believe working class people shouldn't be disposable. Yet historically, it's working class families who shoulder the most of the burden of war, while political and economic elites make the decisions.
That's well put. I mean, Kevin brings up an excellent point there of how many photographs of politicians giving these speeches do you have? And anytime I see something of this nature, especially as I've gotten older and become more politically aware, what sacrifices have you made, realistically, as Kevin brings out, to stop more crosses being added to that, to stop for more American lives being claimed by this war, whether it's just or not? But also, what sacrifices have you made that equate to what you're using this political propaganda for? In my opinion, in our modern world of politics, I believe there are very few politicians that have used that for the right reasons. I believe politicians that have the combat experience or at least have served in the military as veterans do understand. And I think some of them perhaps have done that for the right reasons over the years. But I would say that for the majority of Congress, well over 80%, in my opinion, and not just Congress, that's state and federal officials too, they've used it for the wrong reasons because they know they can. It sells and pushes agendas. It sells and pushes the military industrial complex that fuels the United States war effort that we've seen realistically. It fuels the bonus, or not bonuses, but the money that they're going to get from the increase in the stock value of that. And that's what a lot of that's used for realistically. And the next question is what I'm really excited for to bring that in because there are good examples of good propaganda of showcasing the dead, but in a lot of cases, in my experience, it's realistically horrible examples that are used for all the wrong reasons. As Kevin said, honor the fallen. And I'm not going to toot my horn here. I have several good friends that I will say their first name. I won't say their last name because we're going to have different political views. Chris, Bill, Brecken, very good friends of mine that are in the military collecting world, like I am. They're not veterans, but they honor the fallen, those items in their artifacts that belong to mainly Marines that were killed in action, but they honor that. They don't do it for political awareness. They value the story of each item in their artifact of the people out there that do use the fallen as a trope for propaganda, how many of them actually care? How
Yeah.
many of them can tell you the names of killed in action and who they were and how they died? Not that they died for a right or a wrong reason, but just about the individual. I can go to the Vietnam Wall, and I'm very fortunate and blessed with the veterans I've talked to, and I can point out names of the wall and just tell you about that individual, of who they were, what led up to their time of their death, and how the people around them remembered them. How many people can actually say that when they want to trump their pro-war signs that we have in the United States, that they can remember the dead and what they died for?
That's why you're a treasure, Zach.
I wouldn't go that far.
Now I'll add to it. How many have taken the ashes of the fallen to the Marine Corps Museum and given them a burial? You know,
Yeah. Mm. It's wow. Like I said, this is again, a conversation I'm glad we're having. Um, I'm thinking now historically, we've brought up some recent events as far as Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran. Um, but are there any historic examples of KIA troops, um, some other examples being used as propaganda tools? Obviously, there are, but are there any that you all can think of, either offhand or maybe something that you've looked into before this episode?
Ah, dude, I got it right here. I think it's probably one of the most common names associated with killed in action. It's the Sullivan brothers. I don't know if you guys,
Yeah,
when you were in school, were ever taught about the Sullivan brothers, um, but they were a set of five brothers, excuse me, on the USS Juno, I think. But they were all on this one ship, and it was sank by Japanese naval action fire in 1942, if memory serves me correct, and they all perished in the sinking. And it's really monumental because at after that point, any brothers that were in the same company, in the same unit, or on the same ship were then dispersed. That way, the chances of them all dying in the same event are further spaced out. Um, for any of you that have seen Saving Private Ryan, that is loosely based on the accurate story of the, oh boy, I forgot their names now, the real brothers' names. It'll come to me in a moment. But they were split up. But the Sullivan brothers were used as a they didn't die in vain scenario of an entire family that is sacrificed. You know, the parents, all the brothers gone. This is what they did following, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And for an event like the Second World War, that propaganda is going to be used as a way to raise war bond efforts. As like these brothers have all died, what are you doing to make a sacrifice if you're not willing to die? What money? What scrap metal, what food are you giving to the government here? And depending on how people analyze the Second World War, you could use that as, this is good propaganda that's utilizing killed in action for the right reasons, all right, depending on the staple of it. Now, as we advance through history, that's all dependent on how you view the conflicts that are post World War II. And if you guys want to counter that, please do. But the Sullivan brothers are incredibly well known. You have I'll think of the brothers, the Nealon brothers. That's who the brothers in Saving Private Ryan are related to. The Needham brothers are another example. Two brothers are killed in action in the fighting in Normandy. One brother is missing in action in Burma, and the fourth brother, after the Normandy campaign, is eventually brought home, where he is kept stateside so the family doesn't lose its last surviving son. You've got numerous other family members and numerous other killed in action that are utilized for good propaganda. However, this is what's really unique. The Sullivan brothers, and I don't know if their bodies were ever photographed or not or found. However, you don't have the dead being photographed when they're dead in during the Second World War. That was a rule made by the Joint Chiefs of Staff following the Battle of Tarawa, where combat cameramen filmed arguably one of the best combat footages of the Second World War. However, at the end of that, Norm Hatch photographed dead American Marines along the surf and along the beach. That had negative ramifications throughout the United States because turns out Americans do not like seeing their dead. So, following the Battle of Tarawa, an order was directed that dead could be photographed. However, that was kept top secret and classified. No dead Americans could be shown while the war was taking place. Afterwards, that's different depending on the circumstances, but not while the war is happening. Because it's one thing, like I mentioned earlier in the show, to read about the fact that we are taking these casualties in this conflict. It's another thing to see it firsthand, because that could be somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody's husband. That had huge impacts there, and I honestly, to an extent, wish that that's what we would do now. That any photographs, and Kevin, I know you guys had a protocol like this in country, that any photographs taken of dead troops were kept under wraps. But realistically, one. I don't want to see that when I think of our veterans, and I know what's the reality of that and those that are serving. But the impact that that does have on the nation, but at the same time, politically, if the war is being fought for the wrong reasons, that's a political tool right there to use and to push an anti-war movement to maybe end that war. And that goes back to our First Amendment.
Just to address, I did take plenty of photos of that, and all every single photo I take, no matter what it is or I took, was was considered secret. It was classified. I had a TSCI, top secret clearance one, clearance, and it's anything that I go on about my photos being stolen. That was able to happen because I think there's only a few people that have clearance authority. It's like the XO, the S2 officer, the intelligence officer, and then public affairs officers. They can
Right.
actually clear my images. I don't
Right.
know that public affairs is beholden to the secret classified. As soon as you take an image, it's under wraps and has to be cleared before it goes anywhere. But we definitely were.
So for us, it's the opposite. Anything that's photographed on our camera is public domain
Yeah,
immediate as soon as it's taken. Now, does that always happen?
yeah,
Absolutely not, because there are times where I am the only photographer.
yeah,
I was lucky enough that for the majority, pretty much the majority of my time, I had either you or our friend Neil with me as combat cameramen. So if something like that did happen, your cameras were there to take care of that. But there were times where I was just on my own, and I had to photograph that and immediately uh, hand it over to Intel, to the S2, and or send it up your way um, to your staff sergeant. So yeah,
to
that's.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that was the technical differences in the camera, but again, there are always adjustments that need to be made sometimes.
Yeah. Well, to answer your question, I kind of wanted to go first because I knew Zach was probably going to steal all of my answers,
Mm.
being the historian. But I'm really glad that you went the way of the family deaths. I remember watching the movie that was made about the Sullivans. If I'm not mistaken, there was a sixth brother who was too young to enlist at the time. And I don't think that their bodies were ever recovered because their ship was torpedoed, if I'm not mistaken. And they were under the deck at the time. So they're gone. But to answer the question of historical examples, I would say every war. I wrote a list out. I have just off the top of my head the sinking of the USS Maine, the Lusitania, Pearl Harbor, Gulf of Tonkin, Jessica Lynch, Pat Tillman, the Mission Accomplished banner over George Bush. Every country that's ever gone to war has told stories that make sacrifice feel like noble and inevitable. And sometimes those stories are true, sometimes they're exaggerated, sometimes they're fucking lies. As someone who worked along with public affairs, I worked side by side with you guys. I know firsthand that governments don't just fight wars, they fight narratives. They it's not really a conspiracy. It's literally part of how governments maintain public support during conflicts.
Yep,
Do you both think that there's validity to that?
Yeah, both sides do it. Why wouldn't there be?
Very good.
absolutely. I mean, I can't say anything that um, Kevin didn't knock out the window on that one. It's every war since the beginning of the foundation of the United States has utilized its dead for propaganda.
Yep.
Realistically, I mean, look at the American Revolution. How many names do we still remember now, 250 years later, that died for this concept of America that we utilize as this is what they were willing to sacrifice? What are we doing today to honor their sacrifice? And I would always push that to my students, and not in some rah-rah kind of way, but it's like, if we care, what are you doing to try to make sure that these people that died for this concept of American freedom matter? What are you doing to make sure the right politicians are put into play, that further rights are being expanded? What are you doing to make your own sacrifices to pave the way for future generations of Americans that might someday remember you?
Absolutely. So, and we, we talked about families. We just got a couple more points here before we wrap up. But going back to the families now, because it's not just those killed in action that are propped up, right? It's those that are left behind as well, right? The living, surviving members of those killed in action, otherwise known as Gold Star family members. Um, so my question for you is, should Gold Star family members be allowed in official congressional settings, or anything that has to do where there are hearings on political policy, either as speakers, which most of the time, if you've noticed, they don't let them talk, do they? Or in many cases, in most cases, use as props to push whatever narrative the party is going for, right? So obviously, if you have somebody killed in action, you have a family member who may be anti-war, they would be there for them. They don't usually let them talk, from what I've noticed. We most recently, saw them up getting propped up during State of the Union addresses. Uh, you know, both by the party in power and the party not in power. So that's my question to you. Should Gold Star family members be protected in any way from being exposed to this, or is it their free will?
I think they have every right to speak. They earned it.
Well, not just to speak, but
Yeah, to be present,
protection,
to have,
be
yeah.
present.
hmm
Okay. Mhm.
Um, what I hate is when politicians use them like props. There's a huge difference between giving a grieving family a microphone and standing behind them while you score political points, you know? Those families lost more than pretty much any politician in that room. The least we can let them do is speak for themselves instead of speaking through them. Um, if they're there because they want to advocate, absolutely. If they're there because a campaign thinks they'll make a better backdrop than a flag, that is exploitation.
If we were going to have a utopia, a perfect world, which clearly we do not, I would love that the intentions of the political party that's going to use said family members that are willing, their notions be known. But like, hey, we are using you as this specific prop. I wish that that's how things worked, that things were made that up front, and the three of us know that that is never the case. But this question has me think of a Vietnam veteran I interviewed who was with the Army in Vietnam in 69 and 70. And before he went, um, to Vietnam to be a platoon leader, he was tasked for a few months as being, I don't know the exact terminology, Kevin, only you can help me out here, but he would go with the chaplains to inform families that their loved one had been killed in action and was also present for burials. And he did like the Northeast because that's where he was from before he went to Vietnam. And there was a young soldier who had been killed, and he was part of the honor guard at the burial that day. And his job that day was to present a folded flag to this grieving mother. And when he presented her the flag, he said that she spit in my face and she said, "Fuck you and fuck Richard Nixon." And that was her response to that and her son being put into the ground. And I believe that, one, that is her right to do that. She is grieving. She associates the war with a president that still has troops over there. And I think that needs to be allowed. If families feel that their son died for a cause, then they should be allowed to say that. If families feel that them going to Congress and testifying that they believe that their son died for a cause that was not in vain, that a cause that was wrong, they should be allowed to do so. But Lou, you bring up a great point. Would our politicians give them microphones to allow them to do that? Would they let the grieving families speak whatever they want to speak? How quickly would that be taken away? Or how quickly would the live stream of that, if it was being shown on Fox, CNN, and any major news networks, be cut because that's not what Big Daddy government wants to hear at the time? If families want to be allowed in congressional settings, and as long as they're given the opportunity to speak their mind, I think that's fair. That's a First Amendment right. We have that right to speak for or against this war if we're in agreement. If families want to be utilized as a political prop, and in my opinion, as I stated earlier, if they know that that's what they're being used for, that's their decision. That is their choice, their freedom of will to make that decision. Um, you know, I can't speak on that. I have never had a family member killed in action since I've been alive, and the only members that I know of that have been killed in a war were from a side of the war that didn't even win. If families want to speak out, that's their decision. If they want to keep closed up and not have photographs taken of them or be interviewed, that's their right to.
Kev, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean that's
Lou, do
perfect.
you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, you guys are giving such great answers. There's not much room for me to really add anything. I think that it's important for sure that family members, obviously would know. Hopefully, the politician isn't that sleazy um, to kind of keep a family in the dark as to why they're being, you know, presented in front of Congress or anything like that. Um, I mean, I'm assuming that not every single Gold Star family gets an opportunity or even gets a call to come to Congress
Nope.
because it's all about timing and it's all about when do I need you? Okay, your loved one just died. They're fresh all over social media because people are posting their pictures for whatever purpose. So let me utilize you right now. But am I gonna give you a microphone? Hell no, because I don't know what you'll say. You are a wild card to me, and I think that's bullshit. Because if you're going to really honor the family members and you really want to give the impact of what war is, um, or maybe you don't. But if you really want to honor somebody that gave their life, if their loved one wants to speak, you let them speak. They've earned, as an American, they have that right. And as somebody who, you know, whose loved one gave their life for this country, they in all rights and purposes, like earned that right. So that's sort of my thought on that question. I I want us to I want to give you both the chance to kind of leave our listeners with a message. And what would your message be to anyone listening who thinks maybe we're being disrespectful by bringing this topic up and discussing it? It is a very I want to say touchy subject, but it is a very serious subject. We're not doing go to the week this week. I'll say, goats of the week are everybody that has given their life to this country, and no jokes implied in that. Um, but so yeah, you both have a message that you would give to somebody that thinks we shouldn't be talking about this.
Yeah. Sorry to kind of jump in on this.
Besides F you.
Well, I mean, anyone who thinks this conversation is disrespectful, I have to say it's the opposite. The most disrespectful thing we can do is refuse to ask why people died. We honor the dead by learning from their sacrifices, not by or like wrapping ourselves in a flag and pretending every war was necessary. I go on and on about nationalism. That's what it is. I loved being a Marine. Maybe not in every single moment. There were plenty of times I said the opposite, but I did. And I would do it all over again. But loving the Marine Corps doesn't mean I owe blind loyalty to politicians. My oath wasn't to George Bush. It wasn't to Obama. It wasn't to Trump. It wasn't to Biden. It was to the Constitution. If asking hard questions makes people uncomfortable, fucking good. War should make people uncomfortable, you know? If we're comfortable sending 18-year-olds to kill and die, we've already lost something much bigger than the war itself. That, that's it.
Kevin brings up a great point there, and my message to folks, because I think one of the unique attributes of our show, no matter how little or how many views that we really get, or even subscribers are, is that I am one of the main hosts that doesn't have military experience. And I think that's what brings a lot of validity to this, is that we get the military view on a lot of our political and military topics, and you get my view, as a historian and civilian. My message to people out there that disagree with this is: one, listen to this podcast, listen to this show for a moment before you jump in and give an opinion on how we approach this. Um, but to understand, this is a reality for people going forward, that if you are ever going to want a United States of America, regardless of what political side you agree with, wars are inevitably going to happen. Unfortunately, I feel that going forward, a lot of the wars that we are going to fight and participate in are not going to be for just causes. They're going to be for political gain. They're going to be for fueling the military-industrial complex that we've seen in the United States. And I hate to say that, but that's also looking at history post World War II. Perhaps maybe you could argue Korea if you want to. That's not here or there. But look at Vietnam. Truthfully, look at Iraq and Afghanistan. When all was said and done at the end, what came out of that? What what did we gain? Did we conquer land? Did we liberate people in the name of dictatorships and fascism at the time period to help establish a new form of freedom around the globe to keep the rest of the world from collapsing into tyranny like we thought or hoped we were doing during the Second World War by defeating Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan in 1945? And at the same time, understand that these conversations have to happen. When we were referring to those that are killed in action in any kind of conflict, and as the wars that we've fought since World War II, the casualties have gotten smaller in terms of, or let me rephrase that, the deaths have gotten smaller. Yes, but that means it hits that much harder. And wars where you have only 58,000 Americans dying, or when we look at the global war on terror, what is the killed in action for that? 4,000, yeah, around that, give or take. Yeah, it's smaller, but that's still 4,000 families, 4,000 people that didn't come home from a conflict. And look how that ended. What did they die for? Did they die for the events of 9/11? Did they die for a government that was corrupt and trying to make more profit off of the war? What have the 18 troops that have been killed in Iran died for, realistically? How has Iran impacted me and my life? What threat do I have from that? What did these 18 troops not get to come home for?
That's a really good question. You know, I'll point out that the people deciding whether we go to war usually aren't the ones kicking in fucking doors. The people writing the speeches usually aren't the ones writing letters home. Um, the people making money from war aren't they're usually not the ones buried under the headstones, and that's the part that really pisses me off. Every time a politician says they died protecting our freedom, I have just one question. Which freedom?
I think the question that maybe we could consider, or maybe it's a statement, I don't know, I've been drinking. Because this is a tough topic.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to conflict, and if we're ever going to go to war with another nation, we're going to consider it. I think the only people that should be allowed to talk and make decisions are those that have been there or the families that have suffered because of wars recently, to be allowed to give their testimony on what they think should happen instead of those that have never been there. That's one of the issues I've had, is that we can make decisions to send 18-year-olds to send current serving members to war by people who have never been there, who have no idea what it's like outside of Hollywood and video games and photographs and propaganda shoots. But you've got no idea. I will never have a clue of what it's like unless it comes to my front door or I somehow find myself as a freelance journalist in another country. I will never have a clue. And truth be told, I don't want to know. As much as I love it, from the people I've talked to, I don't want to experience what you guys have, because I know the impact it's had on you, and I don't know how I can handle that. I don't want anybody to have to experience that. However, I think the only right thing to do would be to bring in our veterans, those that have been to combat, whether they're active duty or not, in those Gold Star families, and let them make the decisions on future conflicts for the United States of America.
Definitely a valid point. Um, I would caution on that in the sense that there are some who come back and maybe they gain a little bit of power and then lose sight of where they came from. Just gonna throw that out there.
What could
And
you be
That's a
talking
point.
about?
so you know, I would just caution on that sort of like just open-ended. I know exactly what you're saying, Zach, though.
Oh, I know,
You're
but you bring up a great point.
Yeah,
yeah,
I know what you're getting at.
yeah.
yeah,
But
Continue, Lou.
no, but you're right. I think that at least have a voice in the fucking conversation. A meaningful one that doesn't just get passed off of like, well, thank you for your service. Yeah, fuck you. Like, thank me for my service by listening to what the fuck I have to say about this and
yeah.
not passing it off as either sour grapes or fucking whatever else. Take it into account and take it to heart. 'Cause I'm not just saying shit and I never forgot where I came from. So, uh, that's where I would go. Do you all have anything else that you want to add before I close this out?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind taking a moment, just to thank all of those who sacrificed for the right reasons, those who swore that oath to the Constitution, those who didn't come home, um, those who came home not completely there. I think you know what I mean. You know, whether or not we were used the right way, whether or not we fought justified wars and battles, we enlisted for the right reasons. And just would love to say thank you to my fellow Marines, soldiers, airmen, sailors, coasties. Thanks. And you're not forgotten. Um, Unfortunately, the people who remember you aren't always pure and going to use you for the right reasons, but you're not alone. We're here for you. And if you are watching and you ever need anything from us, don't hesitate to ask.
Come on the show.
Yeah.
Love to
Amen.
have you. Zach, anything else?
Only thing I'll add is, as a kid, because I 9/11 was big for me, and I can't wait till we do a show here in the next couple of weeks to bring in that. I think a
Hmm.
9/11 show would be fantastic, from the military side by you guys, and then the civilian perspective too. But um, I used to have this notion that every person that serves for me and my freedom. But thankfully, as I've gotten older, I've realized that whether they saw combat or not, whether they were a political activist or not, the sacrifices they made necessarily weren't for me. They didn't have me in mind. It was for you guys that were there for each other, because those were the people experiencing the absolute best and the absolute worst moments of your life, and that's something I think and I hope that people who listen to this episode will understand is that for a lot of our killed in action, they didn't go over there thinking that, I might die in the name of American freedom. They went over there and they did what they did. They did what they had to do. They gave their lives in a lot of cases for those around them so that they might live, so that they might get a better opportunity, or just because they were caught in the wrong place, wrong time. And I think that's what we need to necessarily realize sometimes that it's not always for this aspect of what American freedom, as Kevin brought out, but it's because of the people around them. You guys saw it in Iraq firsthand.
Yeah.
Sure did. So I'll close this out here. We've had this great episode. Um, and regardless of political party or ideology that you may have been watching this through those lenses, hopefully you were able to set those aside for a little bit and think about those who've given their lives in service of their fellow citizens because they should be honored and remembered. But I'd like to leave everyone with some food for thought, so to speak. I think many of us can agree that most wars are fought for power and control. And those who typically gain that control are not those who actually fought, as what Kevin and Zach have both brought up. but the rich and already powerful. Those are the ones who are gaining that type of control. How these wars are spun and to be sold to the American people will differ at times, but typically it's spun in a way to say that they're keeping us safe from those who might do us harm. I would say be cautious in these times and how you consume what they're trying to feed us. And anytime you see them prop up another fallen, poor or middle class soldier, sailor, airman, Coast Guardsman, or Marine, ask yourself, do they really give a shit about that person dying? Or are they just another pawn in their propaganda game? Thank you all.